during last season by Marie Christine and The Wild Party, receiving Tony nominations for Best Score and Best Book for both shows. And his other work includes Hello Again, First Lady Suite, The Petrified Prince, and many others. We also have for the affirmative Peter Filichia, who is a New Jersey theater critic for the Star Ledger and the on-air theater critic for the television station News 12 New Jersey. He wrote the weekly column entitled Stage Struck for Theater Week magazine during its 9-year run, and for 3 years for Playbill Online. And he now writes Theater Goer's Diary each day for theater.com.
Arguing for the negative today, we have Gerard Alessandrini, who tells me that he's lost count of the Forbidden Broadway editions he's done, and he also says that the first musical he ever saw was Fiddler on the Roof, but shortly after that, the one that really impressed him, so much so that he kept going back to see it in the next couple of weeks, was Follies. He thought all musicals would be like Follies, and evidently has learned that they are not. And then we have Stephen Suskin, who wrote show tunes. He's the author of show tunes and for opening night on Broadway. And Mr. Suskin produced the first edition of Falsetto Land and says that he's had 24 editions of Forever Plaid going around the country at one time or another. That's a lot of plaid.
That's a lot of plaid.
So now I guess for the first affirmative, we're going to start over there for 5 minutes. We have a timer in the audience who will guide us with the time. Take it away, over here.
Of course we're in a new golden age of the American musical. Take it from one who's been paying attention for a long time. How long? Well, when I became interested, Betty Comden was still able to have a baby. Since I've been seeing musicals, I have constantly heard the theater is dying, the theater is dying, the theater is practically dead. Oscar Hammerstein wrote that during the previous golden age, when TV westerns and drive-in movies were reigning supreme. They're gone. The Broadway musical, still here. But we're so used to hearing how bad the Broadway musical is that we're in a knee-jerk situation where we just automatically assume that it is. That Depression-era mentality prevents us from seeing that we are in a golden age. For one thing, there's a lot of gold flowing. Last year, Broadway took in $711 million, a 15% increase over the previous season of 603. This year's Christmas week was 18% higher. That's a healthy growth in any industry. The road set new records, too. We're definitely in a golden age, financially speaking. Right now, there are Broadway musicals advertised on the marquees of 22 of Broadway's 36 theaters. So while I won't argue that this is the golden age of the Broadway play, it isn't. It sure is for musicals. Theaters are at a premium. 5 houses that usually have plays, the Belasco, the Nederlander, the Plymouth, the Circle and the Square, and the Atkinson, all have musicals right now. Granted, the show at Circle is a British show. So are the musicals at the Majestic and the Imperial, though the one at the Gershwin sure isn't British. But we now have fewer British musicals in town than we've had in the last 2 decades. It is a golden age for the American musical. We have diversity to prove it, too. Rock musicals, pop rock musicals, new American musicals in the tradition of the golden age before. A healthy, balanced dose of revivals, 2 from the 40s, 2 from the 50s, 1 from the 60s, 2 from the 70s, and even 1 from the 80s. Another show, Fosse, takes in the best of many of those decades. Any golden age should have respect for the previous golden age. This one does. What also makes it a golden age is that we're getting the little kids. There are plenty of shows to take them to, and there are Kids' Night on Broadway now. And we're getting the teenagers for the first time in a long time. This is even better because children are taken to the theater, but teenagers are spending their own money to go. One reason is something that never happened in the previous golden age. The first 2 rows of the orchestra are the cheapest seats in the house for these kids. Now our kids can be first-class, first-row citizens as opposed to second-class, second-balcony citizens. With this opportunity, in fact, every night is Kids' Night on Broadway. Some come early and often. Never have I ever seen such repeat business as I do now. Rent-heads at Rent, the Jeckies that were at Jekyll and Hyde. People got used to going through the doors of the Plymouth, then started getting used to going through the doors of the Minskoff, where Scarlett Pimpernel was playing, and I bet they go through the other doors too, because what's happened? They've learned that there's nothing like a Broadway musical. Nothing. We've also reclaimed the New Amsterdam, now Broadway's most glorious theater. The Ford Center across the street has its charms too, and don't be surprised if you see an American musical, Assassins, at the Roundabout's 42nd Street Theater. Now, back in the 70s when theaters were built, they're not nearly as good as the ones we have now, and that was certainly not a golden age, but we're in one now. The musical theater isn't just Broadway-based. That's nice too. It's something we share with the rest of the country now. New musicals crop up from sea to shining sea. How well I remember attending the opening night of Tommy, and all those people from La Jolla were so proud, full of civic pride, that they had produced a musical that was now on Broadway. Good for them. Good for us too. It's also a golden age because people are making choices they used to make let critics make for them. In 1969, when William Goldman wrote The Season, he pointed out, historically and forever, the show with the big advance is the one that bombs. Well, not forever at all, Mr. G. Now we've heard the term critic-proof shows. And that's good. Musicals that were panned by the Times or the other papers, or both, now run for years. Wonderful. Let people make the choices there. Let them see what they want to see, not what some critic tells them is terrific. That's healthier. In his wonderful book, Beautiful Morning, Ethan Mordden talks about the fact that the biggest influence on 40s musicals was actually something that came outside it, the original cast album on a long-playing record. Well, today we have the compact disc, and what do we have? We have revival cast albums, we have original cast albums, amateur cast albums, all contributing, studio cast albums. It's nice, making for a new golden age. So are the new ways of advertising. It's nice that sophisticated merchandising is helping us now, allowing the word to be spread about the terrific product we had. The internet too. I've met a lot of you people out there through the internet. It's terrific. Finally, it's a golden age for three other reasons. Michael John LaChuisa is writing for it, Steve Suskin is writing about it, and Gerard Alessandrini is still spoofing it. Thank you.
Now I have the opening statement from the negative side. You have 5 minutes.
The American musical has entered a new golden age. When I was first contacted about this event, my immediate reaction was, well, of course the American musical is in a golden age. Right now we have new shows announced for next season, written by people like Charlie Strauss, Cy Coleman, John Kander. These guys are all over 70. But I don't think that's what they meant by golden age. So after much intensive and impassioned discussion, we came up with 3 criteria of what makes what we call a golden musical. The first criteria is critical acceptance. Now, that's not to say that the critics are infallible. Are we sponsored by New Dramatists or Dramatists?
Both.
Dramatists?
Both.
The critics are infallible. But anyway, that's not to say the show needs unanimous rave reviews, but there needs to be a general critical consensus that the material is wonderful and interesting and might well prove to be influential. The second criteria is audience acceptance. The audience needs to like the show and enjoy the show and embrace the show. Now, you or I could probably name a couple of musicals which ran years and years and years and years that still aren't very good, but that a long commercial run does not make a musical a golden musical. If the critics say this show is brilliant and the audience doesn't like it and they don't go and it closes in a week or a month or 3 months, then that's not a golden musical, regardless of how good the work is. The third criteria is after the fact, today, that we can look at the musical 50 years after it was written, or 20 years after it was written, or maybe even 3 years after it was written. You or I, or Michael John or Peter, can listen to the CD and say, yeah, this show is good. Oklahoma is generally considered to be the first musical of the golden age of the American musical. Now, Oklahoma did not get unanimous rave reviews, but the reviews were generally very good. Audiences loved it, and people who saw the Trevor Nunn production in London a couple of years ago generally said, yeah, this show is still wonderful after nearly 60 years. Oklahoma, Carousel, Brigadoon, Finian's Rainbow, Kiss Me Kate, South Pacific, Guys and Dolls, The King and I, Wonderful Town, My Fair Lady, The Music Man, West Side Story, Gypsy, How to Succeed, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, Hello Dolly, Fiddler on the Roof, Cabaret, Man of La Mancha. That's about 20 shows in 20 years. Almost one a season. Well, it is one a season. Which is to say that you could have gone to see a new American musical every year for 20 years, and it would have been brilliant, or nearly so. And that's what we consider a golden age of musicals. Now, in the last 5 years or so, there have been several remarkable new musicals written. There's a small group of relatively young composers at work, and they're doing interesting, intriguing material, which might indeed open up new doors for the musical theater. One of them is sitting across the room here. But have we seen a show of the caliber of Carousel or Guys and Dolls or Gypsy? I don't think so. I don't see how we can begin a new golden age of the American musical until we have at least one new American great musical.
Okay. Now we go to second affirmative, 3 minutes.
Okay. What makes today a golden time for the American musical theater is elementally the same as what made preceding times golden. Synthesis. Experimentation is tempered by craft, and popular sensibility is infused with artistry. This is what is happening today in American musicals. On Broadway, off-Broadway, in regional theaters, in movie houses, on television. Americans love their musicals just as much as yesterday, if not more, and they demand good quality and high quantity, and they are getting it. You want your big splashy musical? You got it. You want your small make me think so hard my head hurts musical? I got it. In the last few seasons alone, we've been offered crowd-pleasing tuners like The Full Monty, intelligent and experimental shows like Contact, directorial reinterpretations such as Cabaret or Chicago, provocative new work like Noah's Whale or Dead Man Walking, or controversial movie musicals such as Dancing in the Dark or the upcoming Hedwig and the Angry Itch. 47 out of the top 100 television shows aired last year featured a musical scene or format, and many dramas are told with a song and dances seen on MTV. That's musical theater synthesized. The musical remains a part of the popular vernacular. It is culturally functional. Technology offers new spectacle. When infused with artistic wizardry, the results are never-before-seen wonders, such as Julie Taymor's puppets in The Lion King or Bob Crawley's sets for Aida. And theatrical dance has never been more popular since the 1920s, the golden age. River dance, tango, Argentina, and swing come to my mind. Now, new voices are being given a chance to be heard as never before. New musicals, as well as the classics, have never been more accessible to the public, whether on recording, whether available to watch on DVD or to download on the internet. Homegrown musicals, musical theater created at regional theaters and opera companies, are meeting with national success. Never before has there been such an output of new work being created regionally. And so many people involved in it, in the production of it, whether on stage or in the wings or in the audience. How can anybody view that cultural trend as unhealthy? It amazes me. Or as non-existent. Writers are tapping into American culture in bold, sometimes disturbing ways. Stephen Sondheim's Assassins, William Finn's Falsettos, Janine Tessori's Violet, Jason Robert Brown's Parade, Adam Gettle and Tina Landau's Floyd Collins, to name a few, are examples of daring musical theater with idiosyncratic American themes. To be American is to be idiosyncratic, a synthesis of a bit of everything and a bit of nothing else seen or heard. Now, without synthesis, no art can be created. With limited possibilities, with the straitjacketing of genre qualifications, you have a wasteland. The American musical is of mongrel birth, the clashing and blending, absorbing and transmuting of diverse culture, ethnicity, and race. It borrows from opera, it steals from ballet, it embraces pop music, it incorporates art. The crossing over is natural and in abundance today. Madonna sings Sondheim, Reba is Annie Oakley. The rock concert is the format of Rent. The classical dance program is the format for Contact. There's nothing pure about the form, and those who decree the lack of purity in a modern musical score, book, or theme are misreading and misinterpreting the past. And the cynical argument that there's less art being created than a generation ago doesn't hold. There's only different art, generously reflecting today's culture. Are we living our daily lives the same way we did a generation ago? Do we think the same way about gender or race? Or when musical writers write about these things today, our daily lives are feelings about sex or skin color. Are we even writing in the same style or mode as then? Of course not. Should we? No. I wouldn't want to write musicals in any other golden era. I couldn't write in a time where women are second-class citizens or blacks are barred from performing with whites. I want choices, abundant choices in music and drama and dance and spectacle when I go to a musical, and I have them today. There are more possibilities to be had, to be sure, but that's what makes this a fertile time, a golden time. Synthesis and possibility.
What we're going to do now is have the second negative.
I know we have the Iron Age and the Golden Age of musicals. I think we're actually in the Brass Age. I think it's yellow and it's metal. It's there, but I don't think it's really golden if you knock on it. And for exactly the same reasons that one might mistake this for the Golden Age is why I think it is not the Golden Age. First of all, I believe that we're on an economic upswing as the rest of the city is, and there were more tourists coming to New York because it's a little safer and a little cleaner, and there's more money being fused through corporations into theater and musicals, so therefore there's more activity. But whether it actually reflects in the quality of the musicals, I really question. Just because there are more productions going on, or than there were 10 years ago, certainly not as many as there were like in 1925, but, or even 1945, but certainly more than there were in 1985. But just because we're on an economic upswing, I don't think that that means that the actual quality of musicals, or what the general acceptance, for example, when we talked about there being a great musical every season at one time, I do think that they pop up here and again. And I love Michael John's musicals, and I've loved great book musicals like Ragtime and City of Angels, but they don't seem to gel with the public. The public doesn't seem to embrace them and take them to heart the way they did a generation or two ago, and become actually part of the popular culture. And it's that diffusion that I think is actually the problem. And Michael John talked about the stylistic choices that we have nowadays. I believe that that is actually the problem too. We have dance shows like Fosse and Riverdance, but dance no longer is incorporated into story the way it was in West Side Story. We have singing musicals, we have musicals that are funny, that are spectacle, but very few take all the elements and put them together. And it's very ironic, I believe, that a show like Fosse is successful because it can take the numbers that were in the context of stories and had irony to them and pull them out of the context and deliver them as a special you would have on a TV show from the 1960s, and the public can sit through that and enjoy that. It seems like, to me, like we've actually regressed. I believe that musicals are about where they were about at 1900. I think we've stepped back about 100 years. I think the Andrew Lloyd Webber musicals, for example, like Phantom of the Opera, which are lovely, are like The Merry Widow or Naughty Marietta. As far as substance of book, they have some lovely tunes and some really nice moments, and they please part of the public, but I don't know if they're stepping forward in any way. I think what happened in the musical theater in the middle of the century was that it was a culmination of generations of music and drama, not only from, as we know, from the American jazz and George M. Cohan and vaudeville, but also from operetta and opera. If you look at Verdi and Puccini, they start you see early Verdi like Louisa Miller, and the arias absolutely stop the show. I don't mean stop it in a good way. The plot stops for them to sing this long aria that really has nothing to do with the story. And then as he progresses, they seem to move more. By the time you get to Aida, the music and songs are incorporated more, and certainly by Puccini they're moving faster. And I believe that that same thing was happening, or influenced what was happening over here, and then we learned how to take music and drama, fuse them together, advance the story, and it saved time, is very moving. And also, it was a synthesis of many different cultures at once. And now it seems like it's all fallen apart to me. It seems like we do have dance elements, we do have dramatic elements, we do have shows with pretty tunes and things like that, but very few of them put anything together like they used to at one time. And I think it's that actually diversity and the choice that is actually the problem with musical theater. And I don't, to me also musicals, the great musicals, weren't just fun and weren't just well constructed, although they were. They also were musicals of great ideas. And if you even look at a musical like My Fair Lady, it's a musical about ideas. Is class actually defined by how you speak and act, or is it defined by how much money you have? And I mean, of course, the idea comes from Pygmalion, but it's there in the musical. And the public looks at that, and on some level, they take it and they embrace it. And though I believe we have bold musicals today, and like Michael John LaChuisa's, sometimes I feel that the public doesn't embrace the idea the way they did from the Golden Age. Thank you.
That's the end of the opening arguments, and now we're going to address some questions to both teams.
First, I will address a question to the affirmative side. It seems to me that there may be an abundance of material out there, but if you look at Broadway, which, like it or not, sets the tone for what we value in the theater, I think it's impossible to argue that it isn't a very conservative place, that isn't necessarily encouraging new work, new voices, new sounds. I mean, to just take the crop of new writers whose names we talk about a lot. We have Adam Gettle, Janine Tesori, and Ricky Ian Gordon, who had their stuff done off-Broadway, and, you know, if you talk to them, feel extremely frustrated by their prospects. You have, you know, John Bucchino, a new guy who's still playing piano in the building, a lobby building at lunch. You have Jason Robert Brown, who had Parade on Broadway, but still had to go on the road with his show to conduct in the pit in order to make money. And you have Michael John, who didn't necessarily have a wonderful experience there. I don't think it's a place that is really embracing the new musical and making it feel like a place where that really encourages it. And you have things like The Lion King and Beauty and the Beast and a lot of revivals that seem to be saying, you know, give us safe, tried and true stuff and family fare. And what message is a composer to take from that? That they should write for kids who are going to, you know, like to come to the theater with their parents, that they should write stuff that sounds like Anna Get Your Gun? I don't think that, I mean, I think you could argue that the message is not an encouraging one. What do you think?
It's your turn.
Fine.
I'll take it if you want.
Just by the very fact that you have mentioned so many names of people that are recognizable to virtually everybody in this room, this is quite a crop. I'm not sure 15 years ago you could have mentioned anybody who was up and coming in that way. Suggests to me that we are definitely in a golden age because we know these names, we are looking forward to their work. Yes, of course, some of these people had to do other jobs to get by. There's no question about that. But nevertheless, they're getting noticed, they're getting productions. I don't know if Janine Tesori is going to have to do much work next year after Thoroughly Modern Millie comes to town. I don't know if she's going to have to drive a cab or whatever she does. John Bucchino's album is out there now. It's getting a lot of attention. I'm very encouraged by the fact that we know these names, that you gave off such a litany to me suggests that you're in fact defeating your own argument here by giving us such quality people who I think are doing very well. It takes a while to get going. There's no question that Bach and Harnack's first show was a failure. So was Cole Porter's. So was Kander and Ebbs. I mean, those people didn't start off brilliantly, and they had a chance to grow. I think that these people have a much more interesting track record than those guys did when they were doing their second show.
Michael, do you want to add to it? Michael John?
You know, what may very well be brass might be the Broadway scene. I look at the entire nation and I look at the world and I go, wow, there's so much musical theater being created out there. I disagree with your statement about the Broadway being what we think is the best. It may no longer be, and I'm very happy to accept that. I've been there, seen it, done it. Bad, you know, it was hard work, and it wasn't no different than me putting together a show down at Joe's Pub. You know what I mean? All work is relative to me as a writer. Now, I think that the brass element that you're talking about might very well be Broadway, and Broadway might have its problems, but I do not think the musical theater genre in general has a problem. I think this is great. These names that you mentioned there, they have gotten their shows produced. They have gotten their cast albums done. That's a remarkable thing. 'Cause if it were a wasteland, if there was not interest in it, there would be no cast albums. Now, it is hard to get them granted, but I'm telling you, each one of these people you mentioned have albums coming out. Their music is in the store. The accessibility to the music via the internet and via radio even. There's radio programs now springing up, and particularly in the West. We don't have a lot of them in the East, which is a shame. There's a lot of accessibility to this new music here. Broadway may not be the place to look for it.
But the fact is that there are enormous hit Broadway musicals, just not the ones which we might consider good, for lack of a better word.
There's a lack of critical responsibility, primarily from one of the most important papers in this country, New York Times. The New York Times critic is an imbecile. Absolutely. And I think he's an absolute imbecile, and it's very important that that be taken into account with these new shows.
Time to mellow out.
Blinking eye. Let's get back to the debate. Has the American musical entered a new golden age with some of the theater's best critics, writers, and artists?
A handful of names has been mentioned, which we're all familiar with, and we all hear it. For me, it's become one long name. But there are the people that are visible, and in some ways have been anointed by a couple of houses in New York, a couple of producing houses. But there are programs like the NYU Graduate Writing School, where there are a couple, I don't know how many people are matriculated at this point. There are people writing around the country. There is a whole group of young people. There's the musical theater works, which is bringing along a number of people. They are all getting the kind of training and the kind of help and the kind of encouragement that writers of this sort may never have had. How do you feel about that? And this happening across the country, as has already been mentioned.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I don't believe that by saying we're not in the Golden Age doesn't mean it's a wasteland. And I mentioned that I feel we've regressed. I feel that those places that have given young writers and up-and-coming writers opportunities are very valid and very real, and someday one of them may, in fact, deliver a musical that changes our culture the way Showboat or Oklahoma changed our culture. And I do believe that many of the writers are somewhere probably along the lines where Roger Hammerstein and Lerner Lowe were when they did, you know, The Day Before Spring or something like that. But nobody seems to have actually hit the bullseye yet. And certainly, it certainly isn't being hit every season. So there's a difference between it being a wasteland and being things developed out there. I think it's very encouraging, and I love that those writers are being developed. And I know that there are a lot of wonderful writers that haven't made a name for themselves yet, and some that are making names for themselves yet that deserve to continue writing and being creative, and I'm very glad are funded by producers. But I don't think that just because those opportunities are there, it means that we are now reaping the benefits of the Golden Age. And I mean, I really love Michael John's musicals, I do, and I love Sondheim when he goes places that are new and fresh. And it's just that they're done at small houses. They have limited runs. None of them have had the success that The Lion King has, and I wish they had. I don't really care for The Lion King much, and sorry. And so nobody's quite put it all together yet, and that's what we talk about, the Golden Age. Where is it art and also popular culture at the same time?
There's training now in schools. There used to be training, real training, where composers and lyricists could write many shows. Bach and Harnack, as you say, their first show was not a hit, but they wrote their first show in 1958, and in 1959 they won the Pulitzer Prize. In those days, in the 50s, there was places like Tamament where they would do a new review every week, and that's where these people wrote shows, and the economics of producing a show were so much lower, and the number of empty theaters was so much higher that a new composer like John Kander could do 3 Broadway musicals within a few years, and if the first 2 were failures, there was still money to go to give him another shot, which you don't have now. Jason Robert Brown does one show, it doesn't work out well, and I've lost time here.
Couldn't you argue that your standard is unfair in the sense that these are not, Oklahoma and the shows you mentioned, Gerard, Carousel, Guys and Dolls, were shows for their time, and we're in a different time. And it's a time in which the musical plays a different role. It's not the pop music of our culture anymore. It was at one time. There's a lot that competes with it. There's, you know, other media, and there's rock and roll, and so it plays a different role in our culture. And also, basically, you can't necessarily argue that you seem to be arguing that the work isn't out there. Couldn't you say that the work is there, it's just the avenue to being produced has now become much more difficult to travel, and that because those are deemed as risky, they're not at all encouraged. Producers are risk averse. They're not getting produced. They're not getting seen. As a result, people aren't hearing this music. They're not getting used to it. It's not becoming part of our lives in any way. But that doesn't have to do with the work itself or the fact that it exists. It just isn't getting the kind of the tools to get exposed. It's gotten a lot harder to get out into the public, and it's marginalized. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the work isn't of a high quality and in abundance.
That is very true. If we had no hit musicals today, which going back 10 years ago, it was pretty barren. If nothing was successful today, then that would be saying, well, the economics are against it, pop recordings are not interested in Broadway, and there's no media interest in Broadway, so Broadway musicals cannot survive. But the fact is that there are enormous hit Broadway musicals, just not the ones which we might consider good, for lack of a better word. You know, when all these composers, Billy Finn calls them the three named composers. All the three named composers, when they write material, and some of this material is extremely good. Your shows, the scores, were quite remarkable. I think a lot of this material, what's happening is that these people, these writers, are going off in different areas and pushing the musical in places where it hasn't gone before. And that is very exciting. But, you know, too many of these people cannot pay the electric bill. And if you say that, well, you know, nobody writing for Broadway can pay the electric bill, then that's fine. It's just the conditions of the time. But Beauty and the Beast can run forever, and Aida can run, and Jekyll and Hyde can run. And people are indeed supporting it. So there's a lot of money going into Broadway. But the works which even Peter or I might say, oh yeah, this is really good, those are the ones which are not finding an audience.
Are we going on?
So
I would like to add to that, just go back. I'm not saying that somebody should write a duplicate of Oklahoma about, you know,
they've tried.
A picnic at a bar and, you know, make them, you know, do foxtrots. What I'm saying is that I want a show that uses popular culture and music, but affects people as much. I really don't believe that Lion King, on the long run, will affect people the way, for generations, the way Showboat and Oklahoma did. I mean, Showboat and South Pacific probably changed people's attitudes towards prejudice. I don't believe Lion King will do that.
Gerard's first musical was Fiddler on the Roof. My first musical was South Pacific. And I think in some sense, for me, it's been downhill ever since. One of the reasons is that simply the score. Those songs, everybody knew those songs. In fact, people still gather around pianos and sing those songs. We've said very little in a way about scores, or tangentially, of course, they've been mentioned. But also, Agnes DeMille was choreographing. Hanya Holm was. And Jerome Robbins was in the 40s and 50s. Do you feel that, can you define the Golden Age in terms of those elements, the score, the performers?
South Pacific's my favorite musical. And what I need to understand in a question that's posed like that for me is, what is popular music today? Now, if you open up Variety, you're going to find 20 top 10 lists. Now, You know, there is no one American popular musical. And I think what you're all longing for is a real healthy white culture. And I think that there's something that you're not talking about here, or I'm hearing underneath it all. I know when you mentioned Showboat changing maybe the way that we think about race, I have questions about that. I have serious questions about that. Music now, in terms of what popular music is, speaks to a variety of different cultures. Who's going to put it all together and entertain? What is that culture is the next question I would ask that this popular music's being written for. You know, are you talking about a white culture that it would respond to, a white culture that might not like, you know, rap music, and really enjoy rock and roll? What is this culture? What are these words, you know, that you're using here?
Everything's marginalized today. If Lucy had her baby on TV today, she wouldn't get a 51 rating anymore. It has changed. Everything's split. Many more channels. Our focus is different. It's a very different situation now.
And I think all the music that you do here on Broadway addresses a panoply of tastes culturally. It's a lot of that. Some of it is successful. Some of it does reach people, and some of it doesn't. Some of it doesn't, you know, make it for the audience. But it is out there, and I think that that's, you know, something that can't be dismissed. It is out there happening. I want to just talk a little bit about this. I think what you're also hinting at about music is people say there are no melodies anymore. And melody is only a part of music. It's not music. It's an element of music. Rhythm is an element of music. And some composers, some new composers, might prefer to highlight the rhythm in their number as opposed to highlighting melody. Now, that was a preference of that period of their golden age there of the 40s and 50s. Melody was king. If you listen to rap music today, you won't find that so much. Rhythm is the highlighted element of music in it.
What about this idea, Michael John, you talk about speaking to an audience, and I question whether or not the audience is out there anymore, given that, you know, there's so much competing for their attention and their interest. And let's face it, it's not being, you know, kind of inculcated in the schools. There isn't necessarily a love of theater that people are coming up with the way they once did. Arts programs are cut back, and it's a real concern on the part of the schools. People are not being exposed to this stuff. And in terms of just kind of hearing the sounds you're talking about and this kind of alternative approach to music, the only way that, from what I hear, is it's going to take off is if people hear it a lot and often, and it gets produced a lot and often. And if it isn't necessarily, I mean, people may be writing it, but if it isn't getting produced, then people aren't getting exposed to it. And is there the audience out there for this new stuff? I mean, you make that face, Peter, but the stuff is still in the margins.
Attendance is up. I mean, there are the same 36 theaters that there used to be. That figure hasn't changed. Some have come down, some have gone up. But the point is, what's in them is drawing people in. You're saying that people aren't going. Of course they're going. Of course they're there. The attendance figures for most of these shows are really quite high.
I'm talking about the kind of shows they're
Listen,
seeing.
you know, I just have to talk about something with this Disney element here. It's a real phenomenon of producing, and, you know, it took me a long time to reconcile to it, too. I was very scared of Disney at first. Their long-range plan is really quite remarkable when you look at it from a bird's eye view. They created a show called Beauty and the Beast where young children went to go see it. When these young kids became adolescents, they went to go see Lion King, and now that's the audience that is filling up that theater for Aida. Now, you want to give your subjective taste about this as musical, I don't know, but it is creating an audience, and I think that is an extremely healthy thing. I don't know, you're talking about culture being bad, and music theater is just a reflection of being culture. It's not, culture is music theater. And it never has been that way. We're just a reflection of the culture. And that's where its success lies. That's why musical theater today is so successful, because it is a great reflection of what people want. And when you criticize Disney,
right. Beauty and the Beast has wonderful messages out there. Reading is good. If you're the weirdo, you're not necessarily a weirdo. Force does not make a person the best person. The best-looking person is not the best person. I'd rather have my kid learn stuff like that than plenty of the other messages that are out there. One of the songs that's popular today is a song called Shake Ya Ass. No, I'm sorry. I'd rather hear a song from Beauty and the Beast, and I'd rather have my kids hear a song from Beauty and the Beast. I'd rather see my kid wearing a T-shirt that says Beauty and the Beast, my first Broadway show. Oh, do I love that. Instead of I'm with stupid. I mean, you know, these are good things.
Okay, what's Ted's time, Peter?
I'd like to go back to and hear some more about the whole idea, the idea of ideas in musicals. The statement was made that there was a time, the Golden Age, by your definition, or one of your definitions, was a time when musicals embodied ideas, and that they don't now. My sense of things is that just taking three or four things that are on Broadway right now, say the Full Monty, I think there are ideas in that. I think it is about something important, whether it's treated well or not. It's about a town that's going bankrupt. The Lion King, the argument could be made that it's about nothing. The Lion King is about plenty. It's about great theatrical ideas. It's about creativity. Whereas if you look at Oklahoma, what is Oklahoma about? Generally, the synopsis of it is, with whom should a girl go to the picnic? And in the 20s, of course, which somebody has called the Golden Age, the musicals were notoriously about nothing, and the 30s as well, until something, I guess the general consensus is that Pal Joey made a big difference. Well, Showboat having come at the end of the 20s and changed the climate quite a bit. But so I'd like to hear more of your sense of the idea and the loss of the idea as the definition of why it's no longer is a golden age.
Yes, I really find that I like musicals that are idea musicals, and I'm not saying that they don't exist nowadays. I believe they do. They're just rarer. In fact, that's why I like The Wild Party, because it was loaded with ideas. And actually, I actually like The Full Monty for the same reason. I just want to bring up with The Full Monty that, do you realize it's the first musical, and probably the first successful musical in 20 years or more, that had a contemporary setting? For some reason, all the musicals that have been successful in the last 20 years, Les Mis, Phantom, all of those, City of Angels, they're all set in different time periods. No, musical comedy, I want to say, true. That's true. Oh. But all right, well, let's say, let me give you that. Let's say it's the first, only the second musical in 20 years since Special Whorehouse that's contemporary. I mean, they're so rare, and yet when you look back and what we're calling the Golden Age, half or more of the musicals were contemporary settings. All the Common Ingredient musicals, Damn Yankees, Pajama Game, all the Frank West musicals, Guys and Dolls, most of them are all contemporary settings, How to Succeed. I just wonder why that happened, why people don't write musicals with contemporary settings anymore. And I do believe that the Roger Hammerstein musicals, as simplistic as they may seem nowadays, because of them themselves, actually were musicals about ideas. And I think, yes, absolutely.
On Oklahoma, which is a good question, and I'm not the world's biggest fan of Oklahoma, but I enjoy Oklahoma. What Oklahoma did was, at the end of the first act, you had a character who did not know whether she should go to the social with one person or the other. And she had a dream about it, to decide what she should do, and within the context of the dream, we introduced into the musical theater psychology. I mean, she has a dream that she goes with the fellow she loves, the other guy comes, ends up killing the one she loves, and as the curtain falls on the first act, she goes with the fellow who she does not want to go with because of the psychology in the dream. And what made this remarkable was that they didn't come out and she didn't say, gee, I'd rather go with him, but I'm going to go with him, and I think maybe if I go with him it'll be bad. They did not use words. They used dance. And this is really what the golden age of the musical theater is about, the combination of using words and music and the book and the choreography and even nowadays the scenery to tell the story, not just words. And that was Oklahoma.
Is it possible, do you think, that you guys are just bringing what you've been steeped in to this argument, in the sense that you have, your conventions that you grew up in, you miss now? That, storytelling, I think we could argue, has kind of not as much of a priority as it used to be, and there are, musicals that don't use it at all. They're much more sung through. They don't have the same kind of book quality that they used to. And as Michael John said, a lot of the music, doesn't necessarily emphasize melody, and that to some extent these are just growing pains that those of us who were raised on a different kind are not accustomed to, but that perhaps is pushing us and challenging us towards, a whole new era, and that it's right for now, whether or not we realize it now.
No, I think that we have, there is very good work happening, but people are not supporting it as of yet. And if you have a great piece of work and nobody goes, then that doesn't help anybody, including the creators who need that encouragement. Take a show like Floyd Collins, which some people liked a lot, some people didn't like. But it was an important show. It was very much different from what we've seen. And this show played, I think, I might be wrong, it was either 6 or 8 weeks in a theater with 150 seats. Nobody moved it. Nobody was interested in moving it. And it opened, it closed, and it died. Fortunately, somebody made a recording of it, but recordings of off-Broadway musicals might sell 5,000 copies nowadays. So what you have is, say, 6 weeks with 150 people. I'm not going to do the math, but you might have 30,000 people who either saw Floyd Collins originally or who got the record album and listened to it and enjoyed it. Now, 30,000 people can see Beauty and the Beast tonight, around the country in 1 week. So the work is there. There are all sorts of interesting ideas. There are certain musicals which I find have remarkable scores, some of these new musicals. And when you see them on stage, I don't know that the director, choreographer, or maybe the librettist, or maybe the designers are actually helping the songwriters, helping the composers. Well, I mean, Michael's 2 shows last season, and I didn't want to get personal about it, but if you know those shows from the CDs, you're going to think, this is remarkable. There are like all these wonderful ideas coming out of nowhere, and as soon as you get to one place, he goes someplace else, and it's always, interesting. And this, Beauty and the Beast can run. I don't mean to pick on Disney. Jekyll and Hyde can run for 3 years, but these new important shows don't have an audience.
I'd like to have you consider what it means when one of the hottest tickets in New York, a musical that most people in New York probably, rather than the bookers on the road looking for a hit, would have voted for as the best musical of the last season, is a musical that contains no original music. What does that mean to you? What does that say to you about a golden age of musicals?
That's an anomaly. I don't think that's the first time that's ever happened, and I don't think that we can really set that up as a representative of the way things are or the way they're going to be. I find it much more interesting that that same director of that show took a piece from 1957 and found at least 2 new remarkable things to do in The Music Man. One in the way that she led into trouble by having him talk to his friend and have the town get interested in what he was saying, and her curtain call, which was phenomenal. You mentioned Jerome Robbins, you mentioned Agnes DeMille. Well, how come in 1957 nobody thought of that curtain call that Susan Stroman thought of at the end of Music Man? I think that's a tremendous thing. Bookers wanting certain shows, yeah, but that's always been the case. Steve mentions about Floyd Collins failing. Candide failed. The same type of thing. It didn't run that much longer, admittedly in a bigger house. But nevertheless, it failed as well. There are always going to be these glorious failures that people loved and had great affection for, but not the public as a whole. Yes, in essence, every parallel that you can come up with, any show that you can mock today, 50 years ago, looking back in the golden age, well, Howdy Mr. Ice of 1950 was running. This was an ice show. I mean, if people are going to complain about, what's going on, you can look at that too. It's the same season as Guys and Dolls, but it wasn't Guys and Dolls. We have affection for things like Guys and Dolls because we were there. We're old-timers. But I know when I was growing up, the old-timers were telling me, these shows aren't as good as the Desert Song, and I didn't want to know from the Desert Song. Same type of thing. Today's kids are interested in what they're interested in. They're getting the thrill that we used to get when we went for the first time. It's important to keep that alive and keep it fresh, looking at things in a fresh way. It keeps us from getting old.
But I have to say, going back to your first point that you brought about what makes a golden age, critical acceptance, there's a lack of critical responsibility, primarily from one of the most important papers in this country, New York Times. The New York Times critic is an imbecile. Absolutely. And I think he's an absolute imbecile, and it's very important that that be taken into account with these new shows.
I think that for the summations, we should all switch sides.
Oh, that's great.
What we're doing is reviving things from a certain period that is sort of generally accepted as the golden era, because those musicals are better constructed. And a little while ago, Peter, you said that pop songs don't come out of musicals anymore because the books are better now. That is just not true. I don't believe that. I believe that books aren't as cohesive as they were. I believe that they wander more. If you just look at a script from a contemporary musical, and it may be more through composed, but most of them, they're not well-written plays. You look at a book from a certain era of musical theater, and they almost hold up completely as plays on their own. In summation, I would just like to say, where is the charm that we had with musical theaters? I know times have changed, but there must be something that's comparable in our era to the charm that belonged to that era. You know, something sweet, something sort of grandish. You know, now we got, oh, cut foot loose, oh, cut foot loose. I rest my case.
I think there's plenty of charm in the full Monty, as a matter of fact. And the type of book I was talking about was something like Anything Goes, which I think the average book today is better than the book to Anything Goes, which I hope I never have to see again. But every one of these books has been rewritten now. Every one of these revivals, the book gets rewritten. So that's another debate.
The ones that have been left alone actually fare better.
All right, the issue I do want to take issue with is something that Jerry said earlier about tourists, and that is the fact that it's for tourists, you know, so on and so forth. Well, you know, all men are created equal. You know that. You saw 1776. And, you know, to paraphrase a line from that, they're Americans because they're people and they're here. I think it's wonderful that people want to come from all around the world to come see the product we have here in a way that they never did before. That's very exciting to me. And I think it's wonderful that we can share with these people, and when all of us get together in a place, we're all having the same experience and a wonderful time. I love the fact that when I go to the theater now, I see young next to old, next to black, next to white, next to Asian, next to gay, next to straight. That's what I see when I go to the theater now. It's more homogenous than ever before. Thank God it is.
Bye-bye. And that completes today's debate.
All right. I just want to jingle with the right